once China achieves self-reliance and independence, it will not only satisfy the demand in China, but sell to every corner in the world. I would say China, in a matter of years, will no longer need to import any chips of any kind, advanced, super advanced, or ordinary grade semiconductor chips from any country or any region in the world, meaning the United States is going to forfeit this large market of more than $300 billion worth of chips import from all the other countries and regions in the world.
嗨，欢迎来到果果的频道。本期精彩内容将带来一场国际辩论会上，美国专家直指中国破坏规则，日本代表担忧技术被抄袭，但中国学者高志凯仅用一番话就彻底扭转了局面。他不仅直指美国才是保护主义的真凶，更向世界宣告，你们现在卡脖子的手正在亲手葬送你们未来最大的市场。这场交锋为何如此精彩？他又是如何用对方的逻辑打出最漂亮的反击？让我们一起来看看高志凯如何在这场没有硝烟的战争中为中国立场赢下关键的一局。请看前方发来的报道。
Now let me introduce our panelists. First, from China, Victor Gao, Vice President of the Beijing-based Center for China and Globalization. Great to have you, Victor. So first of all, tell me what semiconductor means to your country.
First of all, semiconductor is like oxygen and blood for every life, in every company, in every family, in our daily life, for the government activities, corporate activities, you name it. It is suffice to say that without semiconductor, modern life as we understand it will grind to a halt. It is a major element of production for everything that we use in our daily life. However, protectionism in semiconductor sector will not work. I think open and free trade of semiconductor is a must going forward.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Now from the United States, Rana Forruhar, editor of the Financial Times. So, Rana, what does chips mean for the United States?
Well, semiconductors are very much integral to the past, present, and future of the U.S. economy. Silicon Valley, which is, of course, where semiconductors were really driven, decades ago, and the innovation really occurred there. That's the growth engine of America. And the future is about creating more resiliency, creating more hubs not only in Asia, but in the U.S. and Europe, where we can make these crucial items.
Thank you, Rana. He has spent more than 30 years writing about TSMC. So great to have you.
Accounting for more than 60% of the world's wafer manufacturing. And the TSMC's high-end processes account for more than 90%.
And from Japan, in the studio, Akira Minamikawa. He's the Senior Consultant Director of research company Omdia.
About 30 years ago, the Japanese semiconductor companies' global market share was 50%, but now going down to 10%. So go back to the high market share. The Japanese company, the Japanese people believes the semiconductor technology is a key, fundamental technology of the every equipment and also the digital transformation and green transformation.
So the United States seems to be changing the global supply chain for semiconductors. So, Rana, through the CHIPS and Science Act, the U.S. is seeking to increase domestic production and preventing China from acquiring advanced semiconductor technology. So can you elaborate on the intention behind this legislation?
Well, I would disagree, actually, with a few of the starting premises there that you lay out. I see the economy as a sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth. And from about the 80s onward, the U.S. made various policy decisions, both democratically and on the Republican side, to outsource manufacturing jobs. The idea was that Americans should all sort of be software engineers and bankers, and that we were going to go up the service food chain and get rid of the making of things. Economists thought that was a great idea. The U.S. and I think China have become too extreme in their own models. This idea that the U.S. can simply be the consumer of last resort and just buy things and not make anything, or that China can continue its practice of being the factory of the world but suppressing wages domestically and so not having a more balanced consumption system, that's not working. It's not working for the whole world. So the idea behind the CHIPS Act is to create more nodes of production, not just in the U.S., but regionally, to support that idea.
So you're saying that the United States wants to diversify the production with the consumption as well.
Yeah, I think that, interestingly, I think both the U.S. and China in some ways have the same problem. We have imbalanced economies. The U.S. is consuming too much. China is producing too much. And you know, my reading, and I'd be curious what others on the panel think, my reading of Made in China 2025 was that in some ways it was an appropriate strategy. You're saying, okay, we want to balance our economy. We want to have more regionalized supply chains. We want to consume and produce. That makes sense. But it also makes sense for the U.S. because, frankly, you can't have a 70% consumer spending economy, which is what we have in the U.S., with wages having been flat or falling in real terms until very, very recently for complicated reasons. That math just doesn't add up. You've got to have a more diversified, resilient economy. And I disagree with the notion that there is some zero sum between no holds barred, laissez-faire globalization and protectionism. I think there is something in the middle, and I think it makes sense to have more regional nodes of manufacturing.
Okay, thank you. So, Victor, from China's point of view, this United States intention of diversifying production, what do you say to that?
First of all, before this latest round of CHIPS war initiated by the United States and forced by the United States onto its allies, China was very happy to import more than $300 billion worth of chips from countries like the United States, Japan, ROK, and China's Taiwan Island, and elsewhere. China was very much a free trader as far as semiconductor chips were concerned. China produced a lot of chips on the lower end and was very happy to simply import more advanced chips and manufacturing equipment from other countries and regions. Now, as a result of the maximum pressure created by the United States on China, try to deny China's access to advanced semiconductor chips, well, it leaves China with nothing but only one road forward. That is to invest in semiconductor industry as much as possible to eventually achieve complete self-independence and self-reliance to such an extent.
So, Rana, you have something to say?
Just a very quick thing. I think we do need to go into history and remember that Made in China 2025 was actually launched in 2015. That was before the Trump administration's tariffs. That was before Biden's tariffs. China was the first to say, and again, I think appropriately, we want to take more production and consumption regionally. We want to shift. We want to move up the ladder. But let's not pretend that a country that strategically protects industries as part of a planned economy and industrial policy is somehow a victim. Made in China 2025 was actually the first thing globally to say, yeah, we're going our own way and we want to be independent of Western technology.
China is not only producing 7-nanometer chips for the Huawei Mate smartphone that mentioned, China is already making 5-nanometer and is on the way to making 3-nanometer chips with completely Chinese proprietary technologies. This is a game changer because we will see that the semiconductor industry will bifurcate into the model dominated by the United States on the one hand and a self-blazed pathway by China. And I think, as we see in many other sectors, once China achieves self-reliance and independence, it will not only satisfy the demand in China, but sell to every corner in the world. I would say China, in a matter of years, will no longer need to import any chips of any kind, advanced, super advanced, or ordinary grade semiconductor chips from any country or any region in the world, meaning the United States is going to forfeit this large market of more than $300 billion worth of chips import from all the other countries and regions in the world.
Okay, thank you, Victor. So let me ask Huang Wen, what do you think?
Yeah.
Who started this protectionist race, and what do you think of this rivalry between U.S. and China?
Yes, I can hear and smell the fire between the two ladies and gentlemen discussion.
Akira, what do you think of the race between the U.S. and China? You know, who started it? What do you think of the situation going on in the semiconductor industry?
First of all, I would like to say before the U.S.-China chip competition, the 1/3 of the semiconductor engineer in U.S. Was the China people, China engineer. So that the huge talented engineer go back to China now, and then support to the semiconductor development in China. So there is a very high possibility that China catch up the technology. However, the Japanese companies and people are very concerned about the China copy issues. So many semiconductor equipment company is afraid to ship the leading edge equipment and technology to China. It means the Japanese companies will lose the market share in the future.
So, Victor, Akira was saying that Japanese companies are afraid of Chinese companies stealing technologies and copying things from Japan. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I would say without this chips war launched by the United States of America, China would be very happy to be the largest importer of chips of all kinds, including from Japan. And there was no need to break off from this free trade tradition. However, when this war launched by Washington tried to deny China's access to the advanced semiconductor chips, China is not going to be a second Japan. And by the end of 2023, China was not only the largest producer of semiconductor chips, mostly on the lower end and medium end, of course, but China is already the largest exporter of semiconductor chips to the rest of the world. It is industry subsidy, which is being accused of by the United States government in many ways against China, against many other countries. But the United States is really violating its own sacred policy of free trade and free market economy, for example, and adopting more and more policies like a planned economy. This is the irony in the world today.
Rana, what do you say to that? I mean, like, the United States is violating free trade policy?
Maybe the Chinese should be flattered that the U.S. is actually taking a page out of their book of the last 40 or 50 years. I mean, listen, the truth is, if you go back in history, most countries at most times, particularly during growth periods, have had industrial strategy. The U.S. has actually been kind of unique, particularly amongst developed countries, in not having an industrial strategy in the last 30, 40 years or so. And that was part of this turn towards neoliberal economics, this idea that it doesn't really matter where you make things, place doesn't matter. But as we know, place does matter for all kinds of reasons. And it's really not just about whatever trade tensions there might be between the U.S. and China. It's about the idea of what if there's a tsunami that disrupts the entire Japanese auto industry? What if something happens in Taiwan, either a geopolitical event or a natural event, and suddenly the lifeblood of the world in the form of semiconductors is cut off? That's not a scenario that anybody wants. And I reject the idea either that this is a chip war or that it's a zero-sum game, frankly. I think it's about rebalancing the global economy in a sensible way for everyone.
Now, because of various reasons, the U.S. is restricting extending semiconductor technology to China. So what are the effects? Victor, what is the impact on China currently?
Thank you for mentioning this. First of all, these sanctions and export controls are in violation of free trade. That's number one, which is a very important point. And I think the American guest may be surprised that this statement comes from the mouth of a Chinese lawyer. But it is true with Chinese characteristics. These sanctions make life difficult in China for the short term. Because if China has no way of standing up and develop its own semiconductor technologies and promoting its own manufacturing, then China will just lie flat on the ground like a victim to be bullied, to be stampeded upon. But China is unique. China stands up. China mobilizes all the resources and put them to good use. I would say this will completely change the dynamics in the semiconductor industry for the whole world. China will reach a point of no need to import any ASML machine at all, because China is figuring out new way of making chips, designing chips, for example, completely different from the traditional technological pathway. China will be the most important semiconductor R&D and manufacturing and exporting center in the world before 2030. You mentioned 2025. 2025 is only 7 months away from now. No one in China is talking about 2025. We are talking about 2030, 2035, and 2050.
Okay, thank you.
The horizon keeps changing.
So, Rana, how do you see the impact on China's semiconductor industry from the export controls from the U.S. and the rest of the world?
So one of the things that's tricky about technologies like semiconductors is they're what's called dual use technologies, right? They have both commercial uses and they have military uses. And that's something that is of a lot of concern in Washington. The U.S. military believes that China poses the biggest strategic threat from a military standpoint. And so giving away certain technologies that could be used for military operations, for military development and strategy is foolish.
Huan Wen?
Yes. About the topic, I can give you some viewpoints about this. I think semiconductors are very high-tech and complicated right now. So no country can do everything. The best model is to focus more on developing the parts that you are very specialized in. And as for the parts that you are not strong enough, try to collaborate with others.
视频看完了，高志凯先生在本次辩论中以清晰、坚定且富有逻辑的论述，有力地维护了中国的立场和核心利益，展现了中国学者在国际舆论场上的自信与风度。他的辩论策略和核心论点主要体现在以下4个方面：一、旗帜鲜明的界定本质，揭露美方行为的保护主义实质。高志凯开宗明义，首先将半导体提升到氧气和血液的战略高度，肯定了其全球产业链的重要性。这为他后续的论点奠定了坚实的基础。他随后一针见血地指出，当前半导体领域的困境根源在于美国发起的芯片战和其推行的最大压力政策。他明确指出，美国的出口管制和制裁违反了自由贸易原则，直接挑战了美国自我标榜的自由市场形象，揭示了其行为的保护主义和经济胁迫本质。这一定性先声夺人，占据了道义制高点。2. 巧妙设定叙事对比。 塑造中国的被迫反击者以自由贸易捍卫者形象。他巧妙地构建了一个之前和之后的对比叙事。之前，中国是非常快乐的自由贸易者，是价值3000亿美元芯片的巨大市场，乐于融入全球产业链，并无意挑战现有格局，这塑造了中国和平发展、互利共赢的形象。之后，由于美国的打压和断供，中国别无选择，只能走向完全自主自立。这清晰地表明，中国的自主创新战略是被逼出来的应对措施，而非主动寻求脱钩，将责任归咎于美国的单边主义行动，成功将中国定位为被迫自卫的受害者和现有秩序的破坏者。3. 展现自信与实力，描绘中国成功的必然性和全球影响。在回应美日专家的质疑时，高志凯并未纠缠于细节争论，而是以宏大的视野展现中国决心和能力。他自信地宣称，中国不仅已在成熟制程领先，更在尖端技术5纳米、3纳米上取得突破，并预言中国将很快实现全面自给自足，甚至成为全球最重要的研发、制造和出口中心。他特别指出，一旦中国实现技术突破，将不再需要进口，这意味着美国及其盟友将永远失去中国这个全球最大的市场。这是一个强有力的市场牌反击，直指美国制裁政策最终会反噬其自身及其盟友企业的经济利益，有效地将压力抛回给对方。4. 批驳对方指控，反将一军，指出美国的战略矛盾。当日本专家提出抄袭担忧时，他再次强调，若非美国打压，中国本无此必要，并铿锵有力地回应，中国不会成为第二个日本，展现了中国的独立自主、不畏压服的决心。他更是指出，美国通过芯片法案等进行大规模产业补贴，自身也在实行计划经济式的政策，犀利地揭露了美国在自由市场问题上的双重标准和虚伪性，实现了有效的反击。高志凯的辩论策略非常成功，他不仅是一位辩手，更是一位中国立场的卓越阐释者。他通过定义问题本质、美国保护主义，塑造有力叙事，中国被迫自立，展示实力与信心，中国必将成功。反击对方矛盾，揭露美方双重标准，有效地维护了国家尊严，阐明了中国发展半导体产业正当性和必要性，并将科技问题背后的政治动机和可能产生的经济后果清晰地传达给了国际受众，是一次非常出色的外交舆论交锋。谢谢大家观看，喜欢请点赞、评论加订阅哦。明天见，拜拜。